I'm curious. Obviously, you've mentioned there were several founders. One gentleman obviously drew the short straw and got his name on the dial.
Yeah, yeah, that was an interesting decision. I mean, like all brands, you sit around the kitchen table, and the name is quite important. So we immediately wanted that logo on the dial, but our lawyers suggested that, look, whilst you would win a case, um, the Swatch Group, for instance, have dozens of lawyers worldwide, and they spend their lives trying to sue people who they think are infringing.
Hi, everybody. It's Richard here again, the editor of the WatchGecko magazine, and we're delighted to have another interview with one of the movers and shakers in the watch industry. Today, our very special guest is Mike France, who is the co-founder and CEO of Christopher Ward. Mike, thank you so much for joining us today.
My pleasure. Thank you for inviting me, Richard. And thank you for calling me a mover and shaker. I mean...
Maybe it makes you sound like a condiment, I'm not sure.
I'll be the pepper.
This is another video. It's gone down a rabbit hole already, hasn't it?
Oh dear. Alice in Wonderland, here we come.
Absolutely, we're there. Mike, for people who are not necessarily that familiar with the brand, I mean, I can't believe it, but there's maybe some. Could you please just give us a bit of a potted history of the company about how you were formed?
Sure. Back in 2004, Peter Ellis, my co-founder, and I had just sold a business called Early Learning Centre, which was a sort of educational toys retailer, and largely a bit of whimsy and a bit of boredom combined led us to set up a watch brand. We decided we wanted to exploit the internet, which we foolishly thought was going to grow, and unfortunately it did. And we also thought there was a growing constituency of people who would be buying products from the internet. And as I've said on many an occasion, people actually rang me to say, "What are you doing? Because nobody's ever going to buy a watch off the internet." And back in 04, 05, of course, people weren't even buying clothes off the internet. So it was the Wild West a little bit, but we'd been selling things like climbing frames. So we thought it was a reasonable chance we could sell watches. And so had bumped in again to another old colleague of mine from way back, Chris Ward. The three of us decided to launch a watch brand, knowing nothing about a watch brand, or what we liked watches, knew nothing about the manufacture, the design of them, but we, having learned a fair bit about the industry because we knew people who had been connected with the industry, we thought there was an opportunity not just to go online, but to use that business model to effectively change what we saw as the dynamics of good mechanical watches at a different selling price point. And so we set off. The first watches went on sale in 05. Originally, we were using Swiss movements out of China. Then everybody knows what happened in sort of 07. Swatch Group said they were never going to. They firstly stopped selling Swiss-made movements to the Chinese. We felt that was an important thing for us to have. So we decamped to Switzerland, got in a car, went round and met a whole load of people in Switzerland, came across a Swiss manufacturer who was very happy to work with us. And we established ourselves with a Swiss base. Later on, we met Jörg Bader, who had a company called Synergy Horloger. There was a real meeting of minds, a real synergy between us and him in that sense. And what we had already begun to realize is that to separate yourself from what was beginning to become a cluster of what we now call micro brands. What that phrase really didn't exist back in '08. But there was beginning to be a sort of an upswell of brands coming through. And to differentiate ourselves, we thought we really needed genuine expertise in watchmaking, and Synergy Horloger had that. There are lots of brands, even today, I call them the Rowenta brands. They all go through one or two or maybe three turnkey operations in Switzerland, where you and I, Richard, could turn up tomorrow with an idea for a watch. Their designers would design it, and their manufacturers would manufacture it for us, and we'd sell it. They'd sell it through our internet site. So. Which is fine, and there's lots of great designs out there, but we wanted it to be more rooted than that, and based in expertise. And one of the real pieces of luck that we had, in a sense, was that York had just appointed a master watchmaker called Johannes Janker. Johannes is probably as close to a genius as I'll ever come to working with, and he'd started developing a number of ideas around modules, which ultimately led to an entirely new movement, Calibre SH21, which we funded and brought to the market in 2014, at the same time as we announced that we were merging with SH. So now we had a truly vertical watch brand, putting the customer absolutely in touch with the watchmaker, which is still what we do, and is pretty rare in our industry, because the wholesale model still dominates, and then you have in large measure a very sort of opaque industry. I think it's improving, and I think it's getting better, but we personally, I've always been and become increasingly fascinated the more I've learned about the watch industry and watchmaking. It's one of those sort of incredible areas where the more you know, or the more you find out, the less you know, and the more curious you are to find out more. And so we just want to share our journey with as many people as possible. So we've always sort of been very transparent, we think, and hope, about the provenance of what we do. We share as much information as we can with people about the products we sell. Some think that's demystifying. I think it's the opposite. I think it adds to the magic of these remarkable pieces of micro machinery that we carry around on our wrists. So 2014 was a big sea change moment for us, the launch of our own movement, the merger with Synergy. And since then, I think a number of critical moments have occurred. We appointed in 2015 Adrian Buchman as our senior designer, and the aim then was to really, from 2015 onwards, to create a CW handwriting, a signature, if you will, that whilst we all know that the whole industry owes a huge debt of gratitude to Rolex and the Submariner, really. I think if they hadn't come up with the Submariner, we may not be talking today. And lots of watches are in some way or another influenced by other earlier iconic watches, etc. Mm-hmm. Some veer, and I think in the early days we veered way too close to the homage, without developing our own clear signature. And I wanted us to have a very obvious Christopher Ward handwriting to our design and our approach to watches. And so Adrian, who I still think is one of the, if not the best young watch designer, he was only in his, I think he was 26 or 27 when he joined us. He's remarkable. He's still only in his early 30s, therefore. One of the finest watch designers around. Since then, we've added further designers, Will Brackfield, who was very instrumental in creating the most recent launch we've had, which is the C1 Belcanto, which we may talk about. So we set off on this journey of really creating this identity of watches. it's a journey that will go on forever. But for the first time in the last 12 months, I really feel we've again reached another bridgehead where I look at our entire collection and I don't see obvious weaknesses. There are lots of things we can improve, and there are gaps in the collection. But I think we have a really sort of well balanced, interesting, in some cases, outstanding watches. And I'm not going to be falsely modest about that. I think the people who I know in the business who've put this together, and it's not an individual, it's a collective, and we've got some brilliant people doing some really exceptional things, and they have created, in my view, an outstanding collection of watches. But I'm biased, of course.
Of course you are, and why not? I think I think you're in a very enviable position, because if you can look at your portfolio and not see any obvious omissions or weaknesses, it's a position a lot of people would want to be in. And it's one you can justifiably, I think, sit back and feel quite proud about.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say there are. I think there are some there are omissions. I just don't think there are any obvious weaknesses. We've got some things coming out in the next 6 to 9 months, which are going to plug some of what we consider to be gaps in the collection at the moment. And very exciting it will be too. We hope, but yeah, I think that there are no designs that I look at and go, well, that's not a valid attempt. Of course, all of these things are subjective, and some designs sell much faster than other designs, and we're quite rigorous about our commercial objectives as well. These aren't antique chairs. So they don't get better with age if they're not selling well in the first instance. But the business is growing, the collection is growing, and I think we've got a really great team both here and in Beale, and this verticality that I speak about, I think is and this expertise has just grown and grown, and so we are able to create watches now that 10 years ago we never dreamt we would be able to do. So we live in exciting times.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, just picking up on backtracking slightly on one thing you said, that popped a question into my head. I think you're right. Yes, you have clearly developed now a Christopher Ward style. At a quick flash of a wrist, you can see a watch as a Christopher Ward. I'm just curious, as a watch enthusiast, when you first set out, you mentioned briefly the Submariner. When you first set out, did you have a particular genre of watch in mind you wanted to make, be that field, diver, pilot, whatever?
Honestly, not really, no. The first watches that we produced were dress watches. The inspiration was we describe ourselves primarily as an English brand rather than a British brand, and I think there is a very distinctive difference between British and being English. The English aesthetic is some ways a little gentler. Whilst we're very proud of being British, we've never draped ourselves in the Union Jack, but we try and take elements of what Englishness stands for. And one of the early inspirations, believe it or believe it not, was the rolling hills of the rolling Malvern Hills and the music of Edward Elgar. And that created the
great inspiration.
Yeah, I mean, how we interpreted that with our original design team, and our original design team. There was me, there was Chris, and I brought in a design team I'd used at Early Learning Centre, who'd never worked on watches previously, and so in a sense we hadn't a clue what we were doing. But there was a sort of a freshness about it. And if I'm absolutely honest, I'd fallen in love with the IWC Portofino. as well, which and IWC was a big influence on me personally as a watch brand way back. I'm pleased to say I think they're coming out of a a difficult period and beginning to reassert themselves at the moment, but which I'm pleased about. But back then, 20 odd years ago, they were a genuine inspiration. I loved the cleanliness of their design and in some ways the simplicity of what they were doing, and the fact that you could by and large read the time off most of their watches, which isn't always the case, and that seemed a key principle. So the Portofino, if you go back and look at the C5 Malvern Automatic, which was our very first watch, you would notice some Portofino-esque elements going on there.
Really?
Pretty thinly disguised, it has to be said.
I'm more intrigued to see if I can find the Elgar in them.
Pretty thinly disguised, and much more the homage than we would ever do now. But with some interesting twists. But that so, and dress dress watches as a category were much bigger then than I think they are now. We were all still wearing suits in those days. Well, I wasn't, but lots of people were going to work in suits, and so dress watches and formality in watches.
I was one of those.
Yeah,
yes.
well, we all were at some stage, weren't we, Richard? Formality in watches was reflecting, the mores of society, as they still do, as does anything that we clothe ourselves with or adorn ourselves with. It all reflects what's going on in the wider world. Of course, over time, we've moved to a much more casual approach, informal approach to our lives in general and our business lives in particular. And so, the old sort of dress watch category is sort of not the same anymore. And indeed, a dive watch is as much a dress watch in many ways as
I completely agree with you.
Dress watches were, but yes, that IWC led us to aviation as well. So the third watch we brought out was an aviation watch.
Okay. It's really interesting, your observation on IWC about them having that funny blip period.
Yeah.
I can't remember your exact phraseology. I agree with that. I succumbed to it when I bought IWC Aquatimer Galapagos, which is the one that's completely coated in vulcanized rubber.
Yeah.
And I didn't keep it only because afterwards I realized it was a very age limiting product that was perhaps not what you would consider a classic IWC.
Yeah.
But at the time it was really trendy.
Yeah, no, indeed.
And I think they've kind of gravitated a bit beyond that, maybe a bit now, gone back to their roots more.
I think so. That's my sense of they've stripped back again. They've pared back a bit and gone back to making really sort of in inverted commas, more classical watches of the genre that they've always been renowned for. So I'm very pleased to
absolutely
pleased to see it, I must say.
I'm curious. Obviously, you've mentioned there were several founders. One gentleman obviously drew the short straw and got his name on the dial.
Yeah, that was an interesting decision. I mean, like all brands, you sit around the kitchen table and the name is quite important. Originally, we were going to be called, and this is a bit of an IWC influence as well. We're going to be called MPC, Mike, Pete, and Chris, but we felt that was a little too close to IWC. Then it was going to be Fennell and Worswick, Fennell being my wife's maiden name, and Worswick being Peter's wife's maiden name, but we felt that was all a bit Dickensian, really. So I think
it does sound like a solicitor's firm in
it sounds like
Tale of Two Cities or something.
Dickens was going to have a watch brand, he'd probably call it Fennell and Worswick, wouldn't he? So we ditched that pretty quickly. And then it almost in like a desperation, I said, look, we decided on this English aesthetic, and I said, your name scans really well, Chris. Not that anybody in his lifetime had ever called him Christopher, I don't think. It'd always been Chris Ward. But Christopher Ward, sounds very English, whereas Mike Franz doesn't particularly sound very English. And Peter Ellis was a bit prosaic. So Christopher Ward has a lovely sort of lilt to it, a very sort of English-sounding name. A bit long in some ways, but we just said, look, let's call it that. And what we didn't want to do was have some made up name that didn't stand for something, that was just a sort of a fake name. We wanted it to be real, and so that sort of fitted our sort of mental picture of the sort of brand that we were trying to create. So Chris drew the long or the short straw, whichever way you'd like to look at it.
And obviously, we noticed looking through your wonderful little magazine that you produce and looking on the website that the name has morphed into a symbol. Could you please explain to me the symbol?
Like Prince.
I thought that, but I thought I'm not going to say it.
Why not? I mean, no. I mean, our logos are certainly an interesting subject for lots of people, and we've had 3 in our 17-year history. So I do remind people that, because I counted up once, Rolex have had 27 so far, but variations of their logo. So
Good
3,
fact.
we've got a way to go with only 3. Yes.
Yeah.
The story of that is straightforward, really. Back in 2015. As I say, we were maturing as a business and as a brand at that point. That was this kicking off point for us to create our own handwriting. We were about to embark on a revisit of the website and our comms, and we appointed a design agency who still work with us to relook at our brand and our branding, and they came up with. And it was quite an extensive piece of work. They came up with the lowercase approach, sans serif approach, based on a very famous sort of font, which had roots in both England and Switzerland, and also the Twin Flags logo. And immediately we saw the Twin Flags logo, we thought we want to put that on the dial, because we've never been afraid to zig or zag when others zig, and because right back in the early days, one of the options we thought about was having no logo at all, back in 2004, but we weren't as brave then as we perhaps are now in some ways, or maybe not as stupid as we are now. And so we immediately wanted that logo on the dial, but our lawyers suggested that, look, whilst you would win a case, the Swatch Group, for instance, have dozens of lawyers worldwide, and they spend their lives trying to sue people who they think are infringing anything to do with any element of their copyright. And because they're so powerful, they often win, because nobody takes them to court, because nobody can afford to throw as much at the lawyers as they can. So, and the issue was the Tissot Swiss flag, which is nothing like our logo. It's red, but it's a flag. And they just said, look, there's a danger that they will, wrap you in legalese for years. It'll cost you a load of money. You'll be diverted. Our recommendation is that you join the 2 names up. You go with the name first. Use the logos as a secondary device, and allow 5 years to pass. If there is no noise after 5 years, then you're home free. And shock horror, 5 years on, we decided to go with our original plan, which was that was our Twin Flags moment, our swish only moment, if you like, our Nike swoosh moment, and we've gone Twin Flags only, with the name always on the back and on the rotor arm. So that was something we'd wanted to do back in 2015, but only really had the opportunity to do it safely last year.
Okay. I think, I mean, it's always interesting coming up with logos because we've just done through a similar process. And I think what your twin flag approach, how it works so well is that it's a logo that not only would look good in your magazine, for example, but it lends itself very effectively to being engraved onto a buckle.
Yes, yes.
Whether
Well,
it's monotoned or whatever, it lends itself to all mediums, and I think that's actually, I think it's strength, to be honest.
yeah. I mean, I think that well spotted. In actual fact, Richard, but it does work in a number of different avenues, and indeed, in our most recent watch, of course, we've had no logo. We so 17 years on, we did what we thought about doing back in '04 and not having a logo on at all. So that was an interesting moment
They're
for us.
your watches. You can buck the trend.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So yeah, no, it's I mean, it's a logo. People get very animated. Logos are important. Let's not kid ourselves. Names are important. Um, but I think where we've got to, and these things are always a journey, I think absolutely fits the bill for what we're about as a brand today. And people, seem to be responding well to it. I mean, on average, as we were changing over from the old logo to the new logo on ongoing lines, we're getting a 25% step up in sales for no change at all other than the logo. So, which is interesting. Um,
That's commercially very interesting,
it
honestly.
is, yeah. So and we didn't expect that at all. In one, although it's settled back down to a lower number, but for a while, one of our watches doubled its turnover. At the moment we changed to the twin flags.
How fascinating!
Yeah, yeah. So logos
Yeah.
matter to
I won't
people.
lie to you. When I was looking at it on a computer today,
Mm.
and I was studying it, I was trying to read into it what it was until a colleague said, "Oh, it's X and Y," which of course made sense.
Mm.
Um, but it kind of draws you in. You're sort of looking at it, thinking, actually, this is a really really interesting design. What does it mean?
Yeah, well, it's
No,
simple.
no, yeah, it's a rhetorical
You know what it
question.
means,
Yeah,
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 but it does.
yeah,
I mean, and we
yeah,
tend to
yeah.
attract curious-minded individuals to the brand. I think many micro brands. I mean, whether we're a micro brand or a bit bigger than that now, for debate, but smaller independent brands, I think, and we're certainly one of those. They tend to attract slightly more self-confident people, curious people, slightly more intelligent, if you like, because they're not going to have the instant recognition of those people who are wearing a Rolex or an Omega or whatever. So we tend to attract the more curious minded, and so we have a line that we use, which is "Do your research." And we use it, which is quite a bold statement in some ways. It's quite demanding. But the reason we use "Do your research" is because we know a lot of people who may never have heard of Christopher Ward will take their time to learn about us. And watch lovers generally, you will know this as well as I, better than I. Are often people who will take time to learn about the products that they're buying. They want to know the intrinsic value of things, not just the referred extrinsic value of things. Just because David Beckham or George Clooney wears one isn't enough necessarily for most of our customers to go and buy one. They want to know about the intrinsic qualities that we're bringing to any watch. And I suppose, in a sense, whilst it's a small part of it, the fact that the name isn't on the dial anymore, and it's a logo that prompts interest. It prompts interest and prompts that curiosity. So it's attractive to those people who find those sorts of things attractive, and probably anathema to a whole host of other people. But frankly, I don't say we don't give a damn, but we're not trying to sell watches to everybody in the world. We're not going to be some people's cup of tea, and that's perfectly okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know.